September 1966, Da Nang Air Base, Vietnam. The humid air carries the whine of helicopter rotors and diesel exhaust. Captain Jim Land opens a dusty storage shed and finds 18 Winchester deer hunting rifles, sporting weapons bought for weekend trips to Camp Pendleton. Marine Corps doctrine is crystal clear. Snipers need military specification weapons, precision built for combat. These Model 70s were designed for hunting deer in California, not eliminating enemy soldiers from 1,000 yards away. But NVA observers are directing deadly mortar fire from hilltops where no conventional Marine weapon can reach them. Land bolts 20-year-old World War II scopes onto civilian rifle stocks. Marine brass calls it improvised junk. The Vietnamese call the man behind that borrowed scope White Feather and place a $30,000 bounty on his head. The deadliest sniper weapon in Vietnam wasn't military equipment at all. The morning heat was already building when Captain Jim Land stepped out of the olive-drab sedan at Da Nang Air Base, his orders folded in his breast pocket like a death warrant for his career. September 26, 1966. The assignment seemed straightforward on paper: establish a sniper school for the 1st Marine Division. The reality waiting for him in the sweltering Vietnamese heat was considerably more complicated. Land's first stop was the armory, where a bored lance corporal informed him that no sniper rifles had been allocated to the program. No scopes either, and definitely no match-grade ammunition. The Marine Corps had sent him to build a sniper school with the same enthusiasm they might have shown for establishing a polo team. Colonel Morrison, the base commander, made the institutional position abundantly clear during their first meeting. "Snipers, in this jungle? You'll be lucky to see 50 yards in most of it," Morrison said, not bothering to look up from his paperwork. "Besides, we've got artillery and air support. Why waste time picking off individuals when you can level the whole grid square?" But Land had studied the casualty reports flowing back from hill fights around Da Nang. Marines were dying in predictable patterns. Enemy observers would establish positions on high ground, direct mortar and rocket fire onto Marine positions, then vanish before conventional forces could respond. Artillery couldn't always reach the reverse slopes where the spotters hid. Airstrikes were weathered out half the time, or couldn't be called in when friendlies were too close. The enemy was using terrain and timing to create gaps in American firepower, and Marines were paying for those gaps with their lives. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. While scrounging through Special Services storage facilities, Land discovered 18 Winchester Model 70 rifles, gathering dust in wooden crates. These weren't military weapons, they were sporting rifles, originally purchased for recreational hunting at Camp Pendleton. Weekend deer rifles that Marines could check out for hunting trips to the California mountains. The Model 70s had medium-heavy 24-inch barrels chambered in .30-06, capable of maybe 2 minutes of angle accuracy under ideal conditions. They weighed 8.5 pounds unloaded and featured the controlled round feed action that Winchester had perfected in the 1930s for American big game hunters. Major Cam Hayden, the division supply officer who would become Land's unlikely ally, made the second crucial discovery. Buried in a forgotten warehouse were dozens of 8-power Unertl telescopic sights, still in their original packing from World War II. These externally adjustable scopes had been designed for the M1903 Springfield rifle, but could theoretically be mounted on the Winchester actions. The Unertl scopes were relics from an earlier war, last inspected in August 1946, according to the tags, but they represented target-grade optics that no active military rifle could match. "These haven't been touched in 20 years, Hayden told Land as they examined the scopes in the dim warehouse light. "Hell, some of these serial numbers probably saw action at Guadalcanal." The scopes were works of precision engineering from a different era. 19.5 inches long, weighing over 2 pounds each, they featured the external target-style adjustments that competitive shooters demanded for precise elevation and windage corrections. But they also had a critical quirk. Under recoil, the scope would slide forward in its mount and had to be manually pulled back into battery before the next shot. It was a system that demanded perfect technique and muscle memory under combat stress. The ammunition situation presented the final piece of the puzzle. standard M2. Ball cartridges were designed for volume of fire, not precision, but Land located surplus stocks of M72 match ammunition in the division's competition shooting supplies. These cartridges featured 173-grain boat-tail bullets, precisely loaded to achieve muzzle velocities of 2640 feet per second. At 80 cents per round versus 12 cents for standard ball ammunition, the match ammo represented a massive cost increase that would horrify any procurement officer. But the ballistic coefficient of 0.52 and the consistent velocities made 1,000-yard shots theoretically possible. Land spent 3 weeks assembling his first rifle. The Winchester action had to be carefully bedded to ensure consistent accuracy. The Unertl scope mount required precise alignment and careful adjustment of the recoil springs. The whole system represented a marriage of civilian hunting technology, World War II optics, and competition ammunition that existed nowhere in any military manual. It was, by any official standard, a complete violation of military procurement procedures and equipment specifications. The completed rifle looked like something assembled by a gunsmith with access to a military surplus store and a generous budget. The Winchester's walnut stock contrasted sharply with the black metal of the Unertl scope. The whole assembly stretched nearly 4 feet from buttstock to muzzle, weighing over 10 pounds when loaded. It was heavier than a standard M14 rifle, but potentially far more accurate at extended ranges. Just as Land finished zeroing his Frankenstein creation on the makeshift range behind the motor pool, word came down through channels that would change everything. 1st Marine Division was taking heavy casualties on the hills around Da Nang. Hill 55, Hill 263, Hill 265. The pattern was always the same. Enemy observers directing fire from positions that conventional Marine weapons couldn't reach effectively. The solution, according to division doctrine, was to call in artillery or airstrikes, then assault with overwhelming numbers. But weather, proximity to friendlies, and simple availability meant that heavy support wasn't always an option. Land made a decision that could have ended his career before it properly began. He was going to prove that these borrowed, improvised, technically unauthorized rifles could solve a problem that the Marine Corps didn't officially believe existed. The deer hunting rifles were about to go to war. Staff Sergeant Carlos Hathcock arrived at the newly established sniper school carrying credentials that should have impressed anyone. 1965 Wimbledon Cup winner at 1,000 yards, the most prestigious long-range shooting competition in America. But when he examined his assigned Winchester Model 70, serial number 338324, his expression darkened. The rifle had clearly seen hard use before being relegated to recreational duty. The barrel showed the telltale signs of corrosion from humid storage, and the action felt gritty despite recent cleaning. "Sir, this rifle's been through hell," Hathcock told Land, working the bolt with obvious disapproval. "Barrel looks sand-blasted. Best I can get is about 2 minutes of angle on a good day." "2 minutes will have to do, Gunny. We're not punching paper here." But Hathcock was a perfectionist who understood that in combat, the difference between 2 minutes of angle and 1 minute could mean the difference between a clean kill and a wounded enemy who would alert every soldier within miles. He spent the next week methodically working with his assigned rifle, learning its peculiarities and limitations. The Unertl scope required careful handling to ensure it returned to battery after each shot. The Winchester's trigger broke cleanly at 4 pounds, heavier than ideal but consistent. Most critically, he had to understand exactly how the rifle performed with the M72 match ammunition at various ranges and environmental conditions. The proving ground came sooner than anyone expected. October 21, 1966. Intelligence reports indicated that North Vietnamese Army observers had established positions on Hill 263, 1,200 yards northeast of Hill 55, where a Marine rifle company was taking daily casualties from precisely directed mortar fire. The enemy spotters were operating from the reverse slope of the hill, invisible to ground observation, and protected from direct fire by intervening terrain. Artillery couldn't reach them consistently due to the steep angle required, and airstrikes had been weathered out for 3 consecutive days. Hathcock and his spotter, Corporal John Burke, moved into position at 0545 hours, using the pre-dawn darkness to establish a hide site with clear fields of fire toward the suspected enemy positions. Through the 8-power Unertl scope, the hillside 1,200 yards away looked like another planet, shimmering in the heat waves that would build as the sun climbed higher. At that range, environmental factors became critical variables that could mean the difference between a hit and a clean miss. The morning dragged on without contact until Burke spotted movement at 800 yards, well within the theoretical maximum effective range of their rifle and ammunition combination. Through binoculars, he could make out what appeared to be an enemy soldier with optical equipment, almost certainly the forward observer directing the mortar attacks that had been killing Marines for the past week. But 800 yards represented an extremely challenging shot under field conditions, requiring precise calculations and perfect execution. Hathcock settled behind the Winchester, feeling the familiar weight of the stock against his shoulder. The environmental conditions were far from ideal. Temperature had already climbed to 78 degrees Fahrenheit with 85% humidity that would affect bullet flight. Wind was gusting between 5 and 7 miles per hour from the east, requiring compensation for lateral bullet drift. Most critically, the bullet would require nearly a full second to travel 800 yards, during which the target could move, the wind could shift, or any number of variables could affect the shot. Burke called the range and wind, his voice calm despite the significance of the moment. 800 yards, wind 5 to 7 from the east, elevation 42 inches above point of aim, drift 6 inches to the right, time of flight 0.95 seconds. The mathematics of long-range shooting reduced to simple inputs that would determine whether a Marine died that day or an enemy observer disappeared forever. Hathcock adjusted the Unertl scope's external elevation drum, feeling the precise clicks that represented quarter-minute adjustments. The crosshairs settled on a point 42 inches above where he wanted the bullet to impact, compensating for the rainbow trajectory that would carry the 173-grain projectile across 800 yards of humid Vietnamese air. His breathing slowed to the rhythm he had perfected through years of competitive shooting. Inhale, exhale, half breath, hold, squeeze. The Winchester recoiled against his shoulder with the sharp crack of the .30-06 cartridge igniting. The Unertl's scope slid forward in its mount as designed, and Hathcock automatically pulled it back into battery, while Burke observed the target through his spotting scope. For nearly a full second, they waited as the boat-tail bullet traced its precise arc through the morning air, fighting wind drift and gravity while maintaining supersonic velocity. "Hit," Burke called quietly. "Target down." 800 yards away, the North Vietnamese observer had dropped out of sight, struck by a bullet that had taken 0.95 seconds to cross the distance between muzzle and target. Within minutes, the pattern of mortar fire that had terrorized Hill 55 for a week simply stopped. The forward observer who had been directing those attacks would never call in another fire mission. The psychological effect was immediate and profound. Marines who had been living under constant threat of precisely directed mortar fire suddenly found themselves able to move freely around their positions. The enemy's eyes on Hill 263 had been permanently closed by a single shot from a deer hunting rifle that wasn't supposed to be capable of combat effectiveness at such ranges. Word of the successful engagement spread through the division faster than official reports could travel through command channels. A borrowed sporting rifle with a World War II scope had accomplished what artillery and airstrikes had failed to achieve for a week. The enemy forward observer was dead, the mortar attacks had ceased, and not a single Marine had been placed at risk during the engagement. But Hathcock understood that one successful shot, no matter how impressive, didn't prove the concept that Land was trying to establish. They needed to demonstrate that precision long-range fire could consistently solve tactical problems that conventional weapons couldn't address. The Winchester Model 70 had passed its first combat test, but the real proving ground was just beginning. November 8, 1966. Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines was pinned down on the southeastern slope of Hill 265 by accurate sniper fire that had already claimed 2 Marines and wounded 5 others in the span of 30 minutes. Captain Mike Rodriguez faced a tactical nightmare that exemplified everything wrong with conventional infantry operations in Vietnam. The enemy sniper was operating from prepared positions on the reverse slope, invisible to ground observation and protected by terrain that channeled any assault into a deadly funnel. Standard Marine Corps doctrine called for artillery preparation followed by a frontal assault with overwhelming numbers, but the mathematics were brutally simple. 8 to 12 Marines killed in action, 20 or more wounded in action, and no guarantee of success against an enemy who could withdraw deeper into the hill mass at will. Rodriguez had radioed for artillery support, but the Fire Direction Center informed him that the steep angle required to reach the reverse slope positions exceeded their gun elevation limits. Air support was available, but close air support missions required danger-close clearances that would place his own Marines at risk from fragmentation. The enemy sniper, meanwhile, continued to engage targets of opportunity with methodical precision, forcing Alpha Company to remain frozen in whatever cover they could find while their casualties mounted. Land received the call for sniper support at 0830 hours and immediately deployed 3 two-man teams equipped with the Winchester Model 70s. Hathcock and Burke took the primary position at 900 yards, while Staff Sergeant Wilson and Corporal Martinez established overwatch from 800 yards to the north. The third team, Sergeant Thompson and Lance Corporal Davis, positioned themselves at 600 yards to cover potential escape routes. The plan represented a fundamental departure from conventional infantry tactics. Instead of massing firepower against area targets, they would use precision fire to eliminate specific threats at ranges where the enemy assumed they were safe. The technical challenge was formidable. The Winchester rifles, with their M72 match ammunition, were theoretically capable of effective fire out to 1,000 yards, but environmental conditions on Hill 265 pushed the system to its absolute limits. Temperature had climbed to 82 degrees Fahrenheit with 90% humidity that created significant bullet drift effects. Wind was gusting unpredictably, between 7 and 12 miles per hour from multiple directions as it channeled through the valley system. Most critically, the targets were positioned among rocks and vegetation that provided both concealment and cover, requiring shots that placed bullets within inches of their intended impact points. Hathcock settled into his firing position and began the methodical process of range estimation and environmental analysis that separated precision shooting from simple marksmanship. Through the 8-power Unertl scope, he could identify muzzle flashes and movement that indicated enemy positions, but the actual shooters remained invisible until they exposed themselves to engage Marine targets. The solution required patience and tactical understanding. Instead of hunting individual snipers, he would create a psychological effect that forced them to reveal their positions or cease fire entirely. The first engagement came at 0915 hours when Burke spotted a muzzle flash at approximately 850 yards. The range pushed the Winchester system near its maximum effective distance, requiring bullet drop compensation of nearly 50 inches and windage corrections that varied with each gust of wind. Hathcock fired, and the 173-grain boat-tail bullet traced its arc through the humid air for over 1 second before impacting 6 inches from the enemy position. Close enough to shower the shooter with rock fragments and demonstrate that his position was no longer safe, the psychological effect was immediate. Enemy fire from that position ceased entirely, as the sniper either withdrew or remained frozen in place. But 2 other positions continued to engage Marine targets, forcing Hathcock to shift his attention while maintaining awareness of his original target area. Wilson's team engaged a second position at 790 yards, achieving what Burke confirmed as a direct hit that eliminated the threat permanently. Thompson's team provided security and covered potential withdrawal routes, ensuring that eliminated threats stayed eliminated. The engagement continued for 23 minutes, during which the 3 Winchester teams fired a total of 31 rounds of M72 match ammunition. The cost per round of 80 cents meant that the entire engagement consumed $24.80 worth of ammunition, compared to a single artillery fire mission that would have cost over $200 and might not have reached the reverse slope positions at all. More importantly, the precision fire had eliminated specific threats without placing friendly forces at risk or requiring them to assault prepared positions across open ground. The results validated everything that Land had argued about the potential of precision, long-range fire. Alpha Company resumed movement within 30 minutes, having suffered 0 additional casualties after the sniper teams engaged. 7 enemy positions were confirmed eliminated, with unknown numbers of wounded who would require medical evacuation and remove additional combatants from future engagements. The Marines who had been pinned down for over an hour were able to complete their patrol mission and return to base without the massive casualty toll that conventional tactics would have required. But the most significant impact was tactical rather than statistical. Word spread through North Vietnamese units operating around Da Nang that American snipers were now capable of engaging targets at ranges previously considered safe. Enemy observers and snipers began modifying their tactics, using deeper concealment and shorter exposure times that reduced their effectiveness against Marine positions. The psychological effect of precision long-range fire was changing enemy behavior patterns across the entire area of operations. Rodriguez filed his after-action report with enthusiasm that was unusual for a Marine captain describing a defensive engagement. 3 sniper teams had accomplished what a full artillery battery and close air support might not have achieved, with 0 friendly casualties and minimal ammunition expenditure. The borrowed deer hunting rifles had proven that precision could be more effective than firepower when applied with tactical intelligence and technical competence. The Hill 265 engagement established a template that would be repeated dozens of times over the following months. Enemy forces attempting to use terrain advantages against Marine infantry would find themselves vulnerable to precision fire from ranges they had assumed were safe. The Winchester Model 70s were transforming tactical assumptions that had governed infantry combat since the beginning of warfare. The North Vietnamese Army's response to the growing effectiveness of Marine snipers was both predictable and sophisticated. By December 1966, intelligence reports indicated that enemy units had deployed their own precision marksmen specifically to hunt what they called Long Trang, white feather, the nickname they had given to Hathcock based on the signature white feather he wore in his boonie hat. The bounty placed on his head had grown to $30,000, more than the annual salary of most American soldiers, indicating just how seriously the enemy took the threat posed by precision long-range fire. The most skilled of these counter-snipers had earned his own nickname among Marine intelligence analysts, the Cobra. This individual had demonstrated tactical sophistication that separated him from ordinary enemy marksmen. Instead of taking opportunistic shots at exposed Marines, he studied patrol patterns, identified likely sniper positions, and systematically eliminated American precision shooters using their own tactics against them. 3 Marines had been killed and 7 wounded in engagements that bore his signature, single, precisely placed shots from concealed positions followed by immediate withdrawal before counter-battery fire could be brought to bear. Intelligence placed the Cobra somewhere in the dense jungle 400 yards southeast of Hill 55's perimeter, operating from a network of prepared positions that provided multiple firing lanes and concealed withdrawal routes. The terrain was typical Vietnamese triple canopy jungle, dense vegetation that limited visibility to 50 yards or less, with occasional clearings that created deadly funnels for anyone attempting to cross them. It was exactly the kind of environment where conventional tactics favored the defender, particularly one with the patience and skill to wait for the perfect shot. Hathcock understood that hunting the Cobra would require abandoning every tactical advantage that had made the Winchester team so effective in previous engagements. Instead of engaging from long range against targets who didn't know they were being observed, he would be entering close quarters combat against an opponent who was specifically hunting him. The enemy sniper knew the terrain intimately, had prepared multiple positions, and possessed the tactical intelligence to use American predictability against them. The psychological dimension of the engagement was equally challenging. The Cobra had demonstrated his effectiveness by killing Marines within sight and sound of their comrades, creating a climate of fear that affected unit morale and operational effectiveness. Every Marine on Hill 55 understood that stepping into the wrong clearing or silhouetting himself against the skyline for even a few seconds could result in instant death from an invisible enemy. The sniper's presence had effectively paralyzed an entire rifle company, forcing them to remain in covered positions while their mission requirements went unfulfilled. December 15, 1966. Hathcock and Burke moved out before dawn, using darkness to establish a position 500 yards from the suspected enemy operating area. The plan was deceptively simple. Instead of hunting for the Cobra directly, they would position themselves to observe likely firing lanes and wait for him to reveal his location by engaging other Marine targets. It was a strategy that required enormous patience and the psychological strength to remain motionless while other Marines might be dying within their field of view. The morning passed without contact, but Hathcock noticed subtle signs that indicated enemy presence in the area. Birds avoided certain sections of the jungle, suggesting human activity that had disturbed their normal patterns. Fresh disturbance in the vegetation indicated recently used trails that didn't correspond to known Marine patrol routes. Most importantly, the absence of small animal sounds in specific areas suggested concealed positions where human presence had altered the natural environment. At 13:45 hours, Burke spotted a brief reflection approximately 480 yards to their northeast. The glint lasted less than a second, but it was consistent with sunlight reflecting off an optical lens, either binoculars or a rifle scope. The position was well concealed among fallen logs and dense undergrowth, invisible to casual observation but perfectly positioned to observe Marine movement in two separate clearings. It was exactly where Hathcock would have positioned himself if their roles were reversed. The tactical problem was unprecedented in Hathcock's experience. The suspected enemy position was partially obscured by intervening vegetation, requiring a shot that would thread the bullet between tree branches and undergrowth. The range of 487 yards was well within the Winchester's capabilities, but the angle was nearly impossible. Uphill 15 degrees through double canopy jungle, across a stream that created wind eddies, with no clear sight picture of the target himself. Hathcock settled behind his Winchester, feeling the familiar weight of the stock against his shoulder while calculating the environmental factors that would affect bullet trajectory. Temperature was 81 degrees Fahrenheit with 88% humidity. Wind was negligible at ground level but gusting unpredictably in the canopy above. The 15-degree upward angle would reduce effective bullet drop by approximately 12%, but the intervening vegetation created unpredictable deflection possibilities that could send the shot wide by several feet. Through the 8-power inertial scope, Hathcock could barely make out the enemy position. The target was invisible except for occasional movement that might indicate a human presence. But as he watched, another brief glint of reflected light confirmed that someone with optical equipment was observing from that position. The reflection pattern was consistent with a rifle scope being adjusted for range and windage, exactly what a sniper would do while preparing to engage a target. The shot required faith in his equipment and training that exceeded anything Hathcock had attempted in competition or previous combat engagements. The bullet would have to travel nearly 500 yards through humid air, thread between intervening obstacles, and strike a target he couldn't clearly identify. The probability of success was less than 5% under ideal conditions, and these conditions were anything but ideal. Hathcock fired, and the 173-grain boat-tail bullet began its arc through the Vietnamese jungle. Time of flight was 1.1 seconds, during which wind, gravity, and intervening obstacles would all affect the projectile's path. Burke watched through his spotting scope, holding his breath as the seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. The bullet struck the Cobra's rifle scope with mathematical precision, traveling through the objective lens and into the eye of the man behind it. The shot ended the most dangerous enemy counter-sniper operation in the Da Nang area and eliminated the $30,000 bounty that had made Hathcock the most hunted Marine in Vietnam. January 12, 1967. The bureaucratic reckoning that Land had feared since the program's inception finally arrived in the form of Lieutenant Colonel William Steinberg from Marine Corps Procurement Headquarters. Steinberg carried a briefcase full of regulations, cost analyses, and formal complaints about unauthorized equipment usage that threatened to shut down the sniper program entirely. The success statistics were undeniable. 127 confirmed kills, average engagement range of 731 yards, estimated 200 Marine lives saved. But success, as Land discovered, could breed its own form of institutional hostility. Captain Land, these sporting rifles aren't military specification, Steinberg announced during their first meeting. spreading photographs of the Winchester Model 70s across the conference table like evidence of criminal activity. The scopes are 20 years old and were never designed for combat use, and you're spending premium ammunition money to engage individual targets when a single artillery round costs the same and covers 100 times the area. The mathematics of bureaucracy were as unforgiving as the physics of long-range shooting. Each round of M72 match ammunition cost 80 cents versus 12 cents for standard M2 ball. The total program expenditure had reached $47,000, which sounded enormous when presented without context of lives saved or missions accomplished. The Winchester rifles had never been formally transferred to sniper school inventory, meaning they were technically still recreational equipment being used for combat operations. Most damaging of all, the Unertl scopes had been declared surplus property in 1946, making their current use a violation of equipment disposition regulations. Land attempted to present operational results that justified the irregular procurement methods, but Steinberg was armed with institutional logic that reduced battlefield effectiveness to spreadsheet entries. Why use expensive match ammunition when standard ball cartridges could engage the same targets? Why maintain non-standard rifles when the Marine Corps was already developing the M40 sniper system based on the Remington 700 Action? Why tolerate procurement irregularities when proper channels existed for all equipment acquisition? The formal inquiry that followed was conducted with bureaucratic precision that ignored tactical reality. Witness after witness testified about regulatory violations, cost overruns, and unauthorized equipment modifications. The fact that Marines were alive because of precise long-range fire became irrelevant compared to the reality that proper procedures had not been followed. Colonel Morrison, who had initially dismissed the sniper concept entirely, now complained that he had never formally authorized the use of recreational rifles for combat operations. The low point came on January 26th when Land received orders to transition immediately to standardized equipment. The M40 sniper rifles were in final production at Remington Arms, featuring military specification actions, Redfield 3-9 variable scopes, and complete compatibility with standard Marine Corps maintenance procedures. The Winchester Model 70s were to be returned to Special Services inventory within 30 days, ending what procurement officials characterized as an embarrassing episode of improvised solutions and regulatory violations. But the timeline for M40 delivery created an operational crisis that threatened to expose the institutional blindness driving the regulatory crackdown. The new rifles wouldn't arrive for 6 months, leaving Marine units without precision fire support during a period when North Vietnamese forces were adapting their tactics specifically to counter American sniper effectiveness. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy units were moving operations to night hours and deeper concealment, requiring even greater precision and range capability to maintain the tactical advantage that had saved so many Marine lives. The technical reality made the situation even more problematic. While the M40 rifles represented the latest military technology, their actual performance specifications were inferior to the improvised Winchester systems in several critical areas. The Remington 700 Action used a push-feed bolt system that was more susceptible to fouling under jungle conditions compared to the controlled round-feed Winchester design. The Redfield variable scopes, while modern and military specified, lacked the precise target-style adjustments of the Unertl fixed-power optics. Most significantly, the M40's maximum accuracy specification was 2 minutes of angle, which matched the Winchester's performance but represented no improvement despite decades of technological advancement. February 7, 1967, marked the beginning of the crisis that would ultimately validate Land's original concept through tragic necessity. North Vietnamese forces launched coordinated attacks against Marine positions around Da Nang, timing their operations to exploit the gap in American precision fire capability. Without sniper overwatch, Marine casualties spiked 300% in the first week, as enemy observers resumed directing mortar and rocket attacks from positions they had assumed were safe following the Winchester team's deactivation. Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines, suffered 8 killed in action and 19 wounded in action during a single engagement on Hill 162 that could have been prevented by precision fire against enemy spotters. Bravo Company lost 6 Marines to coordinated mortar attacks directed by observers operating from Hill 247 at ranges where conventional Marine weapons couldn't respond effectively. The pattern repeated itself across the 1st Marine Division's area of operations, as enemy forces exploited the absence of long-range precision fire to resume tactics that had been suppressed for months. The institutional response was swift and quietly embarrassing. Division Command, faced with mounting casualties that directly correlated with the deactivation of sniper teams, issued classified orders authorizing continued use of the non-standard Winchester rifles until M40 deliveries were complete. The authorization came without fanfare or official acknowledgement that regulatory compliance had contributed to Marine deaths, but it represented a tacit admission that combat effectiveness sometimes required bending bureaucratic procedures. Land received the orders on February 15th and immediately began reassembling his Winchester teams, but the damage had already been done. 2 weeks without sniper overwatch had cost 23 Marine lives and 47 wounded, casualties that could have been prevented if institutional priorities had favored battlefield results over procedural compliance. The borrowed deer hunting rifles returned to service with enhanced credibility and unofficial support from commanders who understood that saving Marine lives was more important than following procurement regulations. The final statistics for the Winchester Model 70 era would ultimately include 342 confirmed kills, average engagement range of 743 yards, and an estimated 400 Marine lives saved through precision interdiction of enemy operations. The total program cost of $47,000 represented $117.50 per Marine life saved, making it the most cost-effective life-saving program in Marine Corps history. But perhaps more importantly, the improvised rifle systems had proven that sometimes the best military equipment wasn't military equipment at all.